If you love playing spell swords, gishes, in D&D or Baldur's Gate 3 for that matter, especially of the Warlock variety, but you're sick of Hexblades, then you are especially going to love this one. Welcome to D4. Hey everybody, so here at D4, each week we take a deep dive into character builds for our favorite role-playing games. I like to crunch numbers about them and theorycraft about them, not so that I can tell you like the right way or the best way to play a certain character, but to explore one potential way to build something that is both fun but also really powerful to play. So if you enjoy creating characters for your role-playing games almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build something that you are thinking about playing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I am so glad you're here. So thanks for watching. My name's Colby. I put out character build videos every Tuesday, so if you enjoy what you see, I hope that you will like the video and subscribe to the channel, and even ring that notifications bell so that you never miss an episode. All right, it is time for another Dungeon Dudes inspired build today. Woohoo. I'm actually a little sad because after today, I only have one more left. Kelly and Monty, check them out here, have been such a great source of inspiration for builds for me now for months. Well, actually, if I'm being honest, for years. But I have loved especially their multi-class tier ranking videos so much. Now, for some reason, they decided to put the Warlock video out before the Sorcerer one, even though they'd been going in alphabetical order otherwise. So this response today to that Warlock video feels really old by now. Curse you, Baldur's Gate 3, and how much fun I'm having building characters for you. But yes, today it's finally time to do the Warlock. Now, in that Dungeon Dudes video, Kelly and Monty had a lot of fun wrestling with this question. Can you make an effective Warlock Gish that is not a Hexblade? I mean, to be fair, and I think Monty acknowledges this actually at one point, people were building Warlock Gishes long before Hexblade even was a thing, right? Whether by using Pact of the Blade or by being a Pact of the Tome Warlock and getting the Shillelagh cantrip and then still being able to make weapon attacks with their Charisma modifier so long as you were using a club or a quarterstaff, right? We actually did this in my Warlock tank build a few months ago. But anyway, ever since Hexblade came along, it's really just totally overshadowed any other Warlock subclass for those who want to be weapon-using Warlocks. Or, for that matter, any Bard or Paladin or Sorcerer who wants to be weapon users as well, since a single dip into Hexblade lets you use Charisma for both your spells and your weapon attacks, right? It's so juicy, it's very hard to pass up. But what if you didn't really care all that much about your Charisma score? Or maybe more to the point, what if you might be better off using, say, your Strength to make attacks? I can think of at least one class who would much rather not use Charisma for their weapon attacks, the Barbarian, since the Barbarian's best features require that you be making attacks with Strength, right? Would a Barbarian Warlock work, though? I mean, I have done at least one on my channel that I can think of anyway, the Barbarian support build, that Shaman build. But yeah, that was definitely not built for damage. They weren't particularly gishy. The big challenge, of course, is that you can't concentrate on or cast spells while raging. So is this just too wonky to work? Not at all. In fact, I think you could argue that combining the two might make for a better weapon-using damage dealer than either a straight Barbarian or even maybe a straight Hexblade. And I mean, in the video itself, Kelly totally called me out at the end when he said,
I want to see some Pact of the Blade builds from you, Colby, so that's your next challenge.
And I just have yet to find within myself the ability to refuse that man when he makes a request. And actually, full disclosure, as an aside, Kelly actually reached out to me via Discord after they recorded that Warlock video a couple months ago to kind of theorycraft the idea with me a little bit, and we had a very lively back and forth as we kind of ping-ponged ideas off each other, so I have to give him some credit here for helping me come up with the build today. And yes, for those of you interested in knowing how to build this character for Baldur's Gate 3, stay tuned and I'll go over it in the final thoughts. Anyways, I am super excited to share with you guys D&D Build number 147, the Barbarian, the Barbalock, the Flaming Elephant, the Eldritch Rager. Maybe I should just keep it simple and boring, like the non-Hexblade Gish lock. Ugh, I don't like any of those. Monty gave me the actual title, The Barbarian from Hell. Oh, that's so much better. Huge thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton for the fantastic artwork that he created for this character. He does this every week. He's such a fantastic artist. If you'd be interested in following him on social media or potentially reaching out to him to see if he can commission some art for your character or maybe even your entire party, I will put links in the video description as always so that you can do that. And before we jump into the build, you guys, Lunch Break Heroes' upcoming 5e compatible book of horror adventures, Librus Nocturnum, just passed their funding goal, at the time of this recording anyway. Thanks in no small part to some of you, so huge thank you and shout out to those of you who have already backed it. So yeah, this Kickstarter is greenlit, it will be published, and it is time now to help them hit their stretch goals and take advantage of all the goodies you get when you back a project in Kickstarter. So for those who don't know, the object of Librus Nocturnum is to provide D&D horror enthusiasts with high-quality adventures that their entire table will enjoy. You can run these adventures individually or together in a longer-running campaign. So potentially it could make a really fantastic Halloween-themed mini-campaign once the book's published. Think of it in a similar vein as like other recent releases by Wizards of the Coast, Wild Beyond the Witchlight, Candlekeep Mysteries, etc. The world of Librus Nocturnum is a land beset by evil, where nightmares roam free. Your characters are among a handful who dare brave the darkness. Will you push back the night or join the countless others who have been consumed by evil? In each adventure, Librus Nocturnum tackles a new facet of the horror genre, from gothic horror to body horror to cosmic horror and more. The adventures held within will always give dungeon masters something new, fresh, and most importantly, terrifying. So yeah, inside the book, you will find over 200 pages filled with 13 horror adventures made for characters levels 1 through 12, where you will attempt to survive a zombie apocalypse, solve bloody mysteries, and break dark curses. There are 13 new settlements, towns, and cities to explore, over 30 new creatures and NPCs, beautiful custom art by a variety of talented artists. Honestly, the art in this book is among the best that I've seen in third-party 5e compatible stuff. And there are even some really great, highly detailed maps. And yes, as I've said, there are fantastic goodies available to those who back it now. Things like a custom dice set, Foundry VTT modules for the specific campaigns themselves, and more, with stretch goals that will lead to additional adventures, art prints, and special editions of the book. So if you love third-party content creators and or horror settings in your role-playing games, guys, do yourself a favor. Go back this project. You've only got until Halloween, October 31st, so do not delay. I am putting a link in the video description on how to get to the Kickstarter, and I would really appreciate it if you would use that link so they know I sent you. Big thanks to everyone at Lunch Break Heroes. Huge congrats on hitting that funding goal. I cannot wait to see the finished product here. All right, let's jump into the build. All right, at level 1, for our starting class, I know that the Dungeon Dudes rules are that you've got to start with and primarily be a warlock in this case, if we're going to call it a warlock dipping barbarian, but we're going to be a lot better off mechanically starting barbarian. You certainly wouldn't have to. You could kind of muddle your way through the first couple of levels and just try to survive, but starting Barbarian gives us both medium armor proficiency and martial weapon proficiency, and if we're truly going to be focused on using weapons for this character and not being a Hexblade, we're just a lot better starting off Barbarian. And so, when we first meet our champion, they originate from a tribe of barbarians, yes, but I think that it is perhaps part of this particular tribe's spiritual practice to actively seek out and receive help and guidance from otherworldly beings. Not necessarily deities, but in our case, powerful elemental beings, potentially from other planes of existence. I definitely see this as maybe more akin to like a shamanistic practice where the practitioners are trying to be in tune with the elemental forces of nature that are actually embodied in these powerful, intelligent beings. As for our race, we're going to go Loxodon. Yes, that elephant-like bipedal race that excels above all at one thing, and that is the use of their trunk. Because sure, while Loxodons get advantage against being charmed or frightened, and have some natural armor that benefits from our constitution, actually, that'll be nice, the real reason we want to be a Loxodon for this build is because the trunk not only lets you perform simple tasks like manipulate an object or make an unarmed strike or even act as a snorkel, but above all, it can grapple. And this means that if you want to both grapple and do lots of damage with a big heavy weapon, and we do, then Loxodons are, in my opinion, the best race to go with. Sure, Simic hybrids can also grapple and use two hands, but they have more restrictions on how they can use those appendages for grappling. It requires an action, it can be a little wonky. Thri-kreen can dual wield, but not wield a two-hander and grapple. So Loxodon it is. As for our ability scores, I'm going to say we need to go with a 14 strength plus 2 from our racial, a 15 constitution plus 1, and then a 14 charisma and a 12 dexterity. Part of me would love to get that dexterity to 14 to maximize our armor class while wearing medium armor, but even if I lowered the charisma to 13, I wouldn't have the points for it. I'd have to bring constitution down to 14, and assuming we're going point by, right, as always, and on barbarians in general, and especially on this build, constitution is going to be much more important than dexterity. In fact, part of me is tempted to lower my dex even further just to ensure that I get hit more often, but I digress. For starting equipment, all we really need here is a greatsword or a maul or a battle axe to start off. You might want to get a halberd or a polearm to stash for later, but yeah, like I said, we're going as a heavy weapon user here, and the math says you'll get a little more damage out of a greatsword or a maul, but if your ultimate barbarian fantasy is to use a great axe, go for it. The difference between 2d6 and 1d12 is next to nothing, and yeah, we're going to be switching to a polearm later anyway. As for armor, we don't need it. Not because of the Barbarian's unarmored defense, which we get at level 1 here. This tells us that when unarmored, our AC equals 10 plus our dexterity and our constitution modifiers, but we're not going to be using that. For one thing, with our dexterity of 12 or plus 1, that would put us at a 14 armor class with the plus 3 from our constitution. But because of the Loxodon's natural armor of 12 plus our constitution modifier, we'd be at a 15 going that route. If we wanted to wear armor, scale mail, the only medium armor we'd be able to afford right now would give us a 14 plus 1 from our dexterity, so same difference, might as well go naked. Of course, that will change as soon as we can afford like a breastplate or a half plate or get some magical medium armor, but for now, might as well save some money. Also, at Barbarian 1, of course, we get Rage, which tells us that twice per long rest for now, as a bonus action, we can enter a state of raging fury that gives us, for 1 minute, resistance to all bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, which accounts for most of the damage that we'll be taking in our character's career, by far, and also lets us do an extra 2 damage per attack so long as we're using strength to attack with a melee weapon. We also have advantage on strength checks and saves, which means, yes, advantage on grapple checks, which is a strength-based athletics check, right? As well as shoves, etc. Rage is a really fantastic ability with, yes, one big drawback: we can't cast or concentrate on spells while raging, as we mentioned earlier. That said, there are still plenty of spells that last for a decent length of time but don't require our concentration. And fortunately for us, Warlocks can get some of the best ones that fall into that category, creating some really fantastic synergy for this build. But level 2, as badly as I want Reckless Attack, I have a damage report at level 6 that I've got to keep my eye on, and the only way I get to extra attack by level 6 is to start beelining Warlock now. So that's what I'm going to do. For those of you who are not beholden to the spreadsheet, feel free to take Barbarian 2 first before you start your Warlock levels. As for us, yes, at this point in our hero's journey, they've gone through the rite of passage in their tribe that connects them to that elemental entity and causes them to be at one with one of nature's elemental forces. Because at Warlock 1, we get our subclass, our otherworldly patron, and we are taking my favorite of all, yes, not Hexblade, but the Genie. Now, I will say this. If you wanted to build this character to be a little more defensive, a bit more of a tank, you could instead go with the Fiend patron. Doing so would get us some temporary hit points when we land a killing blow on an enemy, among other things, and that's something that we'll probably be doing a fair bit of with this build, honestly. But even though this character would actually make a pretty good tank-like character, trying to get enemies to focus on attacking us instead of our allies, and then being able to take quite a punch when doing so, I'm not actually building them with their survivability in mind necessarily. If you want to, yes, Fiend is really great. But since I'm going to be comparing them to other sustained damage dealers, and honestly, because I kind of like the character's story a little better this way and just think that Genie is overall a stronger subclass, I'm going with Genie. So, as a Genie lock, the first thing we have to do is choose our Genie kind. A Dao, a Jinn, a Marid, or an Afridi, and we are going with the Afridi, representing the element of fire. This gives us access to an expanded spell list, and later will give us resistance to that damage type as well. My favorite Genie feature, however, is the Genie's Vessel, which first up tells us that we can just jump into our Genie's Vessel, whether it's a magic lamp, a ring, a bottle, a statue, once per day as a bonus action for a number of hours equal to 2 times our proficiency bonus. Not quite enough for a long rest at the moment, but a great short rest, no doubt, as well as a potential safe haven, a free bag of holding, or a way to get smuggled inside of an area that you are not supposed to be in, etc. What's more, we can also now, once per turn, when we hit with an attack, deal extra damage of our Genie's type, so fire for us, equal to our proficiency bonus. Not a bad little sustained damage bump. As for the spells that we would get as Warlock 1, just keep in mind that our charisma is never going to be great on this character, so I'd probably pick things that just work regardless of that fact. What's more, we're not going to be casting spells when we're raging, right? So pick stuff that has more utility outside of combat. Friends, create bonfire maybe, comprehend languages, charm person might work, but the most important one for us for this build is going to be, yes, Armor of Agathis. Agathis? Is that a Canadian thing? Survey says Agathis. Anyways, I love this spell, and it is perfect for us. It lasts for an hour, but doesn't require concentration. As an aside, one of my favorite things about Baldur's Gate 3 compared to D&D, the spells seem to last like either a minute or just all day until your next long rest. Thank you. There's nothing worse than those spells that last like 10 minutes or an hour or whatever. And you're just kind of like, is combat about to break out? I don't know. I think so. I hope so. Wait, I cast Mage Armor at 8 a.m. this morning. What time is it now? 3:52? Okay, phew, I still have it for 8 more minutes. Wait, 4:05? Crap! Anyway, I just really like the simplified design of this lasts for either like one combat encounter or just all day to keep from having to like keep track of the minutes and the hours, right? Maybe that's too powerful, but I like it. Right, so Armor of Agathis, what does it actually do? It gives us 5 temporary hit points, and then when an enemy hits us with a melee attack, they receive 5 cold damage, so long as we have at least one of those temporary hit points left when they hit us. It's a pretty efficient spell, and the best part is it scales very nicely, increasing by 5 more hit points and damage for every level we upcast it. It is especially nice on raging barbarians who are only taking half damage on most things. So the temporary hit points can last a lot longer, meaning we should get more instances of damage as a result. So, in case it wasn't yet obvious, our plan with this character is a little bit similar to the Thornlock build that I did many moons ago, which is, by the way, one of my favorite builds of all time, though it was really weird. Today's build, fortunately maybe, is going to be a lot less niche and a lot more reliable damage-wise, but yes, we are both going to be actively attacking to bring the pain, but also actively trying to encourage our enemies to hit us, both by attacking recklessly eventually, so the enemies have advantage against us, right, and by grappling them, which we will be really great at doing with our trunk, our high strength score, and our advantage on strength checks while raging. If you recall, or for those new to D&D that are coming here from Baldur's Gate, let's say, to grapple an enemy, you take the attack action, but instead of swinging or firing a weapon, you make an athletics check against their athletics or acrobatics check, their choice. And if you roll higher, you grapple them, so long as you have one free hand, or in our case, trunk. When the enemy's grappled, they just can't move. You could also drag them around at half of their move speed. They're not otherwise impeded, however, so if you had them grappled, they could still attack you without like suffering disadvantage or anything, and that's fine since, like I've said, we're going to kind of want them to hit us, as doing so won't hurt us that bad, but will deal some decent damage back to them thanks to Armor of Agathis, and other things that we'll get later on. Grappling is a super potent thing to do in combat that I sorely miss in BG3, as it controls an enemy and forces them to either waste their turn trying to get away, or attack you instead of your more vulnerable allies. It is a great tank and control move, and in our case should help increase our damage as well, which is fantastic. At level 3, we would be a Warlock 2, and that means we get invocations. And I'm gonna say pick your favorite? I mean, at this level at least, there are a ton of great, fun, useful options, but we're not going to be using any of those invocations to increase our damage yet. So sure, grab Devil's Sight to see in regular and magical darkness, or Gaze of Two Minds to see through another creature's eyes, Beast Speech to just talk with animals for free whenever you want it, Eldritch Sight for free detect magic. Just know that whatever we pick, we will eventually be swapping both of them out for other invocations, which yes, we can do when we gain a level in Warlock, thankfully. At level 4, we would be a Warlock 3, and that means we get our Pact Boon. And yes, as I've said, we are taking Pact of the Blade, which lets us either summon a Pact weapon or turns an existing weapon we've already got into our Pact weapon. We can dismiss and resummon our Pact weapon, which is cool, and it is also considered magical for the sake of overcoming resistance. And better yet, now that we have this pact, we can swap out one of our invocations for the improved Pact Weapon invocation, which is going to give the weapon a +1 to hit and damage, and also allows it to be a spell focus for us, though that shouldn't really be necessary when you're attacking with a two-handed weapon, right? You can always let go with one hand to use materials or somatic components, right? We also get second level spells here, and I'd be sure to grab Misty Step for some on-demand teleportation, and then another one worth considering would probably be Mirror Image. It summons 3 illusory duplicates of us that an enemy might accidentally hit instead of us. Now, if and when they do, I don't think they're going to be taking Armor of Agathis damage, unfortunately, but it's still a nice little survivability option that doesn't require concentration if you feel like you're taking a little too much punishment. To be fair, the spell only lasts for a minute, so you might have to start combat by casting this before you rage, which could potentially be not awesome, but again, pull it out if you're worried about your survivability. At level 5, we would be a Warlock 4, and that means we get our first ability score increase or feat, and I think we kinda have to take Polearm Master here. Sure, I'd love to take Great Weapon Master instead. Against low armor class enemies, it would do more damage. But until we have advantage on our attacks, which is not going to come until Barbarian 2, the numbers say that we'd be better off getting a bonus action attack from Polearm Master than the +10 damage, -5 to hit from Great Weapon Master on anything higher than a 12 enemy armor class. And most stuff you fight at this level is going to be higher than a 12 armor class. Sure, if you went 2 levels of Barbarian before Warlock, then you might want to grab Great Weapon Master here, no regrets. But know that at level 6, since you wouldn't have extra attack yet if we went Barbarian 2 first, right? That one single attack per turn with Great Weapon Master is going to pale in comparison damage-wise to what will be 3 attacks per turn if we delay Barbarian 2 so that we can get Warlock 5 by level 6, right? So yes, Polearm Master. One of my favorite feats in D&D, though it's fairly lackluster in Baldur's Gate at the moment. It tells us that when we're using a polearm, in our case a halberd or a glaive, so switch to one of those weapons at this point, obviously. When someone enters our reach, we can make an opportunity attack against them, not just when they leave our reach, right? Which is especially great since now we will have a 10-foot reach if we're using one of those weapons. And even better, when we take the attack action with one of those weapons, we can use our bonus action to make a butt action attack, right? With the blunt end. Now this does a D4 instead of the usual D10 for us, but otherwise, since it's the same weapon, any other damage bonuses we get from using that weapon, including our strength modifier, our rage bonus, and also even the +1 to hit and damage from it being our improved pact weapon, right? And later, of course, the bonus damage from Great Weapon Master once we get it. All of those things are added to the attack, making us not actually care very much about whether it's a D4 or a D10. But at level 6, we would be a Warlock 5, and first of all, that means we get a 3rd invocation, and since we have Pact of the Blade, that means we qualify for, yes, the Thirsting Blade invocation, which lets us make 2 attacks with our pact weapon instead of 1 when we take the attack action with it. So now we will be getting 3 attacks with that polearm every single turn, so long as we've got our bonus action available anyways. I would also consider swapping out the other invocation that we took at level 2 for Cloak of Flies here, personally. It's a little more flavor and fun than it is big damage. With Cloak of Flies, you use a bonus action to surround yourself with a magical aura that does your charisma modifier in damage each round to anyone who starts their turn within 5 feet of you. Yes, including allies, so be careful. You can dismiss it with a bonus action, and there's no duration to it. It just lasts until you turn it off or you're incapacitated. Since we're not focused on charisma here, yeah, that's only 2 damage a turn, so nothing major. but since we are trying to explore the limits of what's possible damage-wise for this character, I'll assume that we're using it. We also get 3rd level spells here, of course, and I mean, Ifriti genies get Fireball, not typically available to Warlocks, so sure, feel free to like open combat with a Fireball if you've got lots of enemies kind of grouped together, and then Rage, if the situation calls for it. But otherwise, I'm probably looking here to things like Dispel Magic, which is used outside of combat as often as not. Fly always works, even if it does require concentration. I mean, if you're up against flying enemies in a fight, it'll be more important to have flight than rage, right? Remove Curse is nice when you need it. Thunderstep provides a big teleport. Tongues is another one of those great when you really need it utility spells. But I'd honestly be planning on using my spell slots just for Armor of Agathis. Upcast at the 3rd level, it would give us 15 temporary hit points and return 15 hit points of damage when hit. Not bad at all. Alright, so at level 6, it is time for our first damage report. Let's talk about what I think combat should look like for us here. I'm going to assume that when combat starts, we've got Armor of Agathis active and our Cloak of Flies active as well. On round 1, I think we should rage and then run in and grapple the nearest or deadliest enemy. Remember, we've got advantage on that grapple check. And then with our second attack, make a weapon attack. Now, brief pause here. While the Thirsting Blade invocation acts essentially like extra attack, technically it's different. Extra attack says that we can make 2 attacks when we take the attack action. Thirsting Blade says we can attack twice instead of once with our packed weapon. So strictly speaking, rules as written, Thirsting Blade isn't just giving you 2 attacks that you can use for whatever you want, right? A weapon attack, a grapple check, trying to shove an enemy, etc. It's specifically giving you 2 attacks with your weapon. That said, I have to believe that the vast majority of DMs would just look at this and be like, yeah, you've got extra attack, it's fine. But not all of them will. Definitely talk it over with your DM before you even build this character. If they're not going to allow you to grapple with 1 attack and then make a packed weapon attack on the same turn, then you're either just foregoing some damage on round 1, or you might want to build this character differently. Don't worry about grappling maybe, and just pick a different race that will give you a damage bump. Custom Lineage or Variant Human would let us have both Polearm Master and Great Weapon Master by this level. So you'd actually probably be doing more damage here going that route than if you were trying to grapple. But I love grappling on this build for 2 primary reasons. 1, it does a great job of controlling an enemy and, as a result, helping to protect your allies. And 2, it helps ensure that our enemy actually tries to attack us, which we want, since if and when they hit us, which they'll have a decent chance of doing, they're going to take a lot of damage in return. Now, the question is, what is the likelihood of an enemy hitting us here? That's kind of impossible to calculate since it depends so much on who you're fighting and what kind of armor you're wearing, right? We don't have Reckless Attack yet, so I'm just going to assume that there's a 50% chance that we're getting hit, returning 15 damage when we do. Is this damage sustainable? Kinda. I mean, we are raging, so we're probably taking half damage on that hit. At level 6, how much is that going to be? 5, 7, 10? It all depends on what we're fighting, right? So will Armor of Agathis last 2 rounds? 3? 4? Probably somewhere in that range, I would think, and that might be all your team needs to finish the combat encounter. So, yeah, obviously we have to make a lot of assumptions here. Feel free to lower my damage calculation slightly if you want to err on the side of caution. But anyways, assuming that the enemy is taking Armor of Agathis damage 50% of the time, after round 1, we're simply making 3 attacks against our grappled target, 2 with the sharp end of the weapon, 1 with the butt. Each attack adds 3 damage for strength, 2 for rage, and 1 for our improved packed weapon, with the first hit adding 3 more from Genie, right? We're also dealing 2 damage every round for Cloak of Flies, and then, yeah, when our enemy dies, we just grab another target and rinse repeat. So, on those rounds, where we're just making 3 attacks against an enemy who's hitting us 50% of the time, and taking a little Cloak of Flies damage each round, against enemies with a 10 armor class, we would on average do 42 DPR, and against a 15 armor class, it would be 34 damage per round. And compared to other sustained damage builds that I've done to date, that's not bad. Call it middle of tier 2 at this level, so pretty solid. And potentially offering some really nice battlefield control and protection while being pretty dang tanky at the same time. And of course, it's going to get a lot better from here. Because at level 7, we can finally, now that we have Thirsting Blade, go back to Barbarian, making us a Barbarian 2 and picking up that long awaited for Danger Sense. Wait, what? No, sorry. Danger Sense is great, basically giving us advantage on dexterity saving throws, but no. What we are super excited about is Reckless Attack, which tells us that when we make our first attack on a turn, we can decide to attack recklessly, giving us advantage on all of our attacks this turn at the cost of giving our enemies advantage on their attacks against us, which we are totally okay with since we have Armor of Agathis and resistance to most damage. As an aside, I really love how BG3 handles this ability, letting you decide after you make your attack if you want to attack recklessly since you missed. Something I'd love to see Wizards incorporate into 1D&D, actually. Regardless, this increases our hit chance, our crit chance, since now we get 2 shots at rolling a nat 20, right? And while it also means that we are going to be getting hit more often, thus triggering Armor of Agathis more reliably, getting hit more often is also going to mean that those temporary hit points go away quicker. And since if we're raging, we can't reapply Armor of Agathis, I'm just going to stick with the assumption that 50% of the time we're doing Armor of Agathis damage. Though in reality, that will probably mean that we return the damage 2 or 3 times early on in the fight, and then it's just gone for the rest of it, right? But yes, at this point, I kind of feel like the core of the build is fairly complete. So let's find some nice ways to augment it. At level 8, as much as I'd love to get back to Warlock, I think it would be worth investing a bit more into Barbarian here. We don't have to, but grabbing a subclass, another use of Rage per long rest, we only have 2 right now, but 1 more level of Barbarian gets us to 3, and that feels like a big difference to me, making me feel a lot more comfortable that we're going to actually be able to rage every combat encounter, or nearly so. And then, yeah, that ability score increase or feat that will be right there for the taking, it feels a lot better of an investment for these next couple of levels than getting to Warlock 7 would, for me personally anyway. So let's stay on the Barbarian path for a minute. Because, yeah, speaking of paths, at Barbarian 3 we get our Primal Path, our subclass, and man, am I torn on what to take here. I mean, first of all, the easy and obvious answer here is the shiny new Path of the Giant from the new Glory of the Giants book, right? First and foremost because it lets you grow to large size, and that means we could grapple enemies who were huge or smaller. Remember, you can only grapple enemies one size larger than you, or smaller, right? And running into huge creatures can happen with some regularity depending on your campaign. So if grappling is an important part of this character for you, and especially if your campaign is going to end sometime between now and level 16, I'd probably go that route here. But for the purpose of our exercise today with this build, I'm not going to. For us, the growing to large size thing will be redundant eventually. And being hyper-focused on damage numbers like I am, it's not the optimal path. Mostly though, I'm not taking Giant because the first time I do Giant Barbarian, I want it to be like the main focus of the build. I don't want to kind of just accidentally back up into this shiny new toy. Anyway, go that route if you want and enjoy it. I almost went Battle Rager here. I've never used Battle Rager in a build, and with our focus on grappling, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to do so, but the reality is, yeah, the subclass is just bad, mechanically. And technically, you have to be a dwarf too. We just get so much more mileage out of going a different race and using that polearm for our bonus action attack instead of a little extra damage from some spiked armor. You could use Battle Rager and it would work okay, especially if your DM lets you be a Loxodon and still be a Battle Rager. And I did a poll a couple of weeks ago and seemed to indicate that this would be fine for the vast majority of you at your tables. In that case, you'd just skip Polearm Master and go straight for Great Weapon Master, save yourself a feat, letting you bump your strength sooner. But yeah, overall damage output would be worse, no question. A third option, Ancestral Guardian. It's the best subclass for tanking on a Barbarian. So again, if your focus with this character is really to try and keep your ally safe above all else, enjoy the little soft taunt that Ancestral Guardians get, which will encourage those enemies even more to attack you. And coincidentally, make it more likely that they take that Armor of Agathis damage, right? But no, in the end, I decided to go with my favorite Barbarian subclass of all, the Path of the Zealot. Our Barbarian is so totally devoted to their patron that they burn, both literally and figuratively, with fiery zeal. And those flames regularly leap out to consume their foes who dare oppose them. Yeah, I think Zealot kind of works best from a thematic standpoint with the whole fire thing, but it also looks best on the spreadsheets, so win-win. As a Zealot Barbarian then, we get 2 features. Divine Fury lets us do an extra d6 plus half of our Barbarian level, rounded down, in damage once per turn when we are raging and hit with a weapon attack. The damage can be either necrotic or radiant, so that's nice. And then we also get the pretty fantastic Warrior of the Gods, which tells us that we can be resurrected via a Revivify or similar spell without the caster having to spend the very expensive components to do so. That's a minimum of 300 gold worth of diamonds that you're saving, right? BG3 players are like, what are these components that you speak of? That's actually really pretty awesome. It just lets you be even more of a consequences be damned, I must kill all who oppose me and mine. Caution to the wind kind of character, and that can be pretty freeing and really fun. At level 9, we would be a Barbarian 4, and that means we get another ability score increase or feat, and so we finally get to pick up Great Weapon Master, which lets us add 10 damage to our heavy weapon attacks at the cost of a -5 penalty to hit, and now that we have easy, reliable advantage with Reckless Attack, that is going to do great things for our numbers. Don't forget, we also get to make a bonus action attack with Great Weapon Master if we land a killing blow on an enemy. And if BG3 has taught me anything, it's this. That free bonus action attack from Great Weapon Master triggers a lot more often than I realize. And as a result, it kind of actually lowers the value of Polearm Master, since we're often getting a free bonus action attack anyway. So with that in mind, feel free to skip Polearm Master if you really want to get this first, and see if you can live with the less frequent but maybe still frequent enough bonus action attacks. If nothing else, we can make that bonus action attack with the sharp end when we land a killing blow, so it'll do a little more damage regardless, so long as we remember to use it when it triggers instead of our butt action, right? Alright, time for a damage report at level 9. Since last check, we've made some really great additions to our damage. First and foremost, Reckless Attack, but Great Weapon Master is a huge bump too, and Divine Fury is a small bump. Our tactics haven't really changed though. We're just hitting harder and more frequently. And so, at this level, against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would on average do 77 damage per round, and against a 16 AC, it would be 60 DPR. And that is a nice increase, putting us squarely in the top half of tier 1 compared to other DPR builds that I've done to date at this level. Now, sure, you might not be doing this much damage every single round, right? Especially if you're taking time to grapple new enemies when your current target dies. But let's not devalue how valuable doing that is going to be for the rest of your party, right? Right. Alright, at level 10, there's actually a third class that I would like to dip into on this build, but I think we might be better served by getting a few more Warlock levels first. There's another spell I really want to grab, and frankly, just increasing our spell slot levels so that we can upcast Armor of Agathis does a ton, both for our damage and our survivability, so let's do that. Thus, we would be a Warlock 6, and as a Genie Lock, that means we get Elemental Gift, the best level 6 feature of all Warlock subclasses, no question, because it lets us fly. Proficiency bonus times per day. With a bonus action, we can now give ourselves a fly speed of 30 feet for 10 whole minutes. I really don't know how that one slipped through the cracks during playtesting, but I'm not complaining about it. Oh, also, because free flight isn't good enough, we now also have resistance to fire damage as an Afridi, a very common damage type in the game, helping to stretch those temporary hit points from Armor of Agathis even further. At level 11, we would be a Warlock 7, and that means we get a 4th invocation, and I'm not quite sure what to tell you to get here, honestly. Tomb of Levistus is a fun, oh crap, I'm about to die card to play to encase yourself in ice. Ghostly Gaze lets you see through walls. Trickster's Escape lets you put the 4th level Freedom of Movement spell on yourself without spending a spell slot, and that spell lasts for an hour. It doesn't require concentration, so it's perfect for us. Lets us be unaffected by difficult terrain, prevents us from being paralyzed or restrained. I'd probably go that route personally, but part of me does want to say take Eldritch Smite here. Some of you may be wondering why we didn't take that last time instead of Cloak of Flies. You could. It's nice. It does a big burst of damage with a spell slot and an attack, very similar to the Paladin's Divine Smite, but this one also knocks the enemy prone. The only problem is, we only have 2 spell slots as a Warlock, right? One of them is getting used for Armor of Agathis, And the other one? Well, that's kind of spoken for now too, because we also get 4th level spells at this level, and that means we get access to the spell that I've been salivating over this entire time, and is the reason we needed to be either a genie or a fiend warlock in the first place. Because unlike other warlocks, we get the incredible Fire Shield spell here. And this is absolutely the perfect pairing for us with Armor of Agathis. Now, Fire Shield only lasts for 10 minutes, unfortunately, so it might be a little tougher to get this off before combat begins, but it doesn't require concentration. It gives us resistance to either cold or fire damage. We should make a warm shield to get cold resistance most of the time, naturally, since we already have fire resistance now, right? But then, whenever a creature within 5 feet of us hits us with a melee attack, yep, they take 2d8 fire damage. Or cold if we make a warm shield. And just like with Armor of Agathis, they don't get to save against this damage or anything, but unlike Armor of Agathis, the damage return isn't based on having temporary hit points. They just take it every time they hit us. And considering our relatively low AC and the fact that we're going to be recklessly attacking most or all of the time, I'm going to go ahead and assume that the enemies are getting hit with this like 75% of the time. The truth is, it might happen a lot more frequently. At this level, lots of monsters are going to have multi-attack, right? And also, plenty of times we're going to have more than one enemy trying to hit us. So 75% might be a little conservative here, but that's fine. I don't mind working in estimates and ballparks. At level 12, we would be a Warlock 8, and that means we get another ability score increase or feat, and yeah, we've been sitting at a 16 strength this whole time. Yeesh. I really hope you have a generous DM that's given you like a belt of giant strength or at least some ogre strength gauntlets, right? Anyways, now we get to bump it to an 18 at least, helping not only our damage, but our grapple checks, of course. At level 13, we would be a Warlock 9, and that means a 5th invocation, and again, I don't really have a super strong recommendation here, but I honestly kind of love this. You know, it lets us take things like Ascendant Step, so you could cast Levitate on yourself at will without spending a spell slot. That's so cool, and I never get to take that invocation on my Warlock builds. Sure, Levitate requires concentration, and we do already have some limited flight, so maybe something different for this build, but yeah, find something cool and fun and useful and have a blast with it. The main reason that I wanted to get to Warlock 9 was so that we could get our spell slots up to 5th level, honestly, since that will mean now Armor of Agathis gives us 25 temporary hit points and 25 points of damage returned, and that's just fantastic. Unfortunately, Fire Shield doesn't scale when upcast. I don't know why, bit of a bummer there, but I still think that we should use it most of the time for that second spell slot. Other than that, 5th level spells to consider, pick your favorite. Keep in mind, again, we only have a 15 charisma, so Far Step might be best in that case for a teleport every single turn as a bonus action, though it does require concentration. Scrying can give some nice out-of-combat utility. Synaptic Static is probably what I would pick for good area of effect damage and a really nice debuff. Sure, enemies get to save against it, but it's an intelligence save, so there is still a really high likelihood that lots of enemies in D&D 5e are going to fail that save, regardless of our pretty mediocre DC. In the end, again, we're probably using these spell slots for Armor of Agathis and Fire Shield, but it's nice to have options. For our level 13 damage report, since last check, we have bumped our strength finally, increased Armor of Agathis to 25, picked up the really great Fire Shield, which again I'll assume is doing damage 50% of the time, and even grabbed some fantastic utility via flight and more invocations. We are definitely living our best Barbarian Warlock lives right now. And so, against enemies with a 10 armor class here, we would on average do 95 DPR, and against a 17 AC, it would be 78 damage per round. So close to that century mark. And yes, while we have seen a nice increase, we've slipped just a little bit when compared to other builds at this level, putting us more like bottom of tier 1. Still super solid, and we're bringing a healthy heaping of control, utility, and tankiness with us to boot. So, at level 14, here's the thing. If we didn't go with the giant subclass, then we've still got this issue with not being able to grapple huge creatures, which can be somewhat common in this game, particularly as we get higher and higher level. Now sure, someone could cast the Enlarge Reduce spell on us and make us bigger, right? But that's kind of asking a lot since that spell requires concentration. Thus, yeah, I want to get Rune Knight. You certainly could have solved this problem with the giant subclass, but not only would that have cost us a little damage, there's actually something really kind of cool and even a little hilarious that I want to do with Rune Knight here in addition to growing large. If you went Giant Barbarian, I'd probably just stick with Warlock from this point on in the build, getting to those 6th and 7th level spells, which unfortunately as Mystic Arcanum for Warlock don't come with spell slots, right? And thus we couldn't use them to upcast Armor of Agathis, for example, even if we wanted to. But then yeah, you also get some really great genie features like letting your friends go inside your magic lamp with you, taking a short rest in only 10 minutes, right? Once a day anyways. And eventually even with Genie getting to limited wish, which is awesome. But for us, no. We are going to explore what happens when we take some fighter levels here. So we'd be a fighter 1, we get second wind, which lets us heal for a d10 plus our fighter level as a bonus action once per short rest, and then we get a fighting style. And while I don't love it, great weapon fighting would add a little damage, letting us reroll 1s and 2s for our weapon damage. And yeah, in this game, it's only our weapon damage, unlike in BG3, which seems to reroll any 1s and 2s that we did with an attack, right? Anyway, feel free to take a different fighting style, go defense or protection maybe, or even superior technique if you wanted. We'll eke out a teeny bit more sustained damage per round from great weapon fighting, so I'm gonna take it. At level 15, we would be a fighter 2, and that means, yes, the almighty action surge, which just has so much use here, and really for any build. So yeah, once per short rest, we can take 2 actions on our turn instead of 1, and yeah, this could mean burst damage, right? More attacks, but also, I mean, maybe if we don't have Fire Shield up when combat starts, since it only lasts for 10 minutes, well, now we could get it going and then still do what we want. Or maybe our DM doesn't let Thirsting Blade allow for a grapple and a weapon attack. Well, now we could grapple, action surge, and then make 2 weapon attacks, right? It just makes the beginning of combat especially so much more powerful and or efficient, and that's always a good thing. At level 16, we would be a fighter 3, and that means we get our martial archetype, our fighter subclass, and yes, as I've said, we're going Rune Knight. It's just so good for this build. First of all, yes, it gives us Giant's Might, which lets us proficiency bonus times per day grow to large size with a bonus action for 1 minute, and while we're large, we do an extra d6 of damage once per turn with an attack, so a nice little bump that, yes, lets us grapple huge creatures now. As an aside, one of the nice things about the Giant Barbarian subclass is that it just makes us large when we rage, so we don't have to spend more bonus actions to get there, right? But the thing that kind of convinced me to go this route instead of the Giant subclass on the Barbarian, honestly, was the Rune Carver feature that we get at this level. This lets us choose 2 runes. We carve them into our armor or our weapons. It gives us a really great list to choose from, but I would take Frost, I think, first, which gives us a +2 bonus to all ability checks using Strength or Constitution. So that'll be great for our grapple checks, among other things. Yeah, it takes a bonus action to give ourselves this buff. We can only use it once per short rest, but it does last for 10 minutes. But best of all, for this build especially, is my favorite, the Cloud Rune. This tells us that when any creature we can see within 30 feet of us is hit by an attack roll, we can use our reaction and this rune once per short rest to cause that attack to hit a different creature. And usually, yeah, that's supposed to mean that you make bad guy number 1 hit bad guy number 2, right? But for this build, come on, hit me. I mean, we have built this character with the express intent to be hit. Here's a perfect opportunity to ensure that happens. I just love the idea of taking a hit that was meant for your friend and making it hit you instead, because doing so is going to cause the enemy who hits you to take a ton of damage. 25 from Armor of Agathis plus 2d8 from Fire Shield. That's a hefty sum, even at this level. And I don't know, it's just too cool and fun to pass up. You might think I'm crazy, and that's okay. Take Giant Barbarian instead. Your damage will be a little less, but you can grapple huge creatures a lot earlier, and with fewer bonus actions spent, right? Anyway, assuming we went this route, at level 17, we may as well go 1 more level of fighter here to grab that ability score increase or feat so that we can finally, here, at last, cap our strength score at 20. For our final damage report then, since last check, we have capped our strength, added a little more damage via Giant's Might, and a fighting style, and really just increased our quality of life and our grappling capabilities through these fighter and rune knight levels, right? Plus the really amazing you have to hit me fun from Cloud Rune. But against enemies with a 10 armor class here, we would on average do 109 DPR, and against an 18 AC, it would be 92 damage per round. And that is a pretty small increase since last check, to be fair, landing us back in kind of the middle of tier 2 territory when compared with other sustained DPR builds, which I've done to date at this level, which, make no mistake, is still a really fantastic place to be. But let's break it all down in the final thoughts. The tier score for this build, if you take the damage that they do at each of the enemy armor classes that we calculate for at each of the 4 damage reports and just average them all into one big number, we end with a 62. And that means we snuck our way into kind of the bottom half of tier 1. With a Barbarian Warlock? Really? That's awesome. In fact, yeah, we're like above the Dive Bomber build, which was fun and hilarious, and just barely below the Hexblade Blade Singer. I'm not gonna lie, I'm surprised at how well this performed. But of course, the real question, as always with these Dungeon Dudes inspired builds, is this stronger than a straight Warlock would be? And the answer, as always, is it depends. In this case, I mean, yeah, what do you want out of your Warlock? An Eldritch Blast machine gun? Well then, no. A spell-slinging blaster or like Fear and Hypnotic Gazer? No. So in that case, I guess the comparison needs to be this. Is this character better than a straight Hexblade? Well, as most of you know, my very first build that I ever did on this channel was a pure 100% unadulterated Hexblade. So I do have something to compare it to. The tier score for that character, 64. So practically the same. Of course, there are major differences, right? I mean, the first several levels of that build's existence relied on the Darkness Devil's Sight tactic, and as many of you know, that tactic can be super problematic for the rest of your table. And even later on, when we got to Shadow of Moyle on that character, we still had to take the first round of combat every single time to set up our advantage, right? Whereas this Barbalock can kind of just rage and start swinging or grappling to lock an enemy down. Now, the straight Hexblade did have a lot better spellcasting, of course. They got to higher spell slots more quickly, more powerful spell options, and yeah, that's a big mark in their favor. I want to qualify that though, because with that Hexblade build, we were concentrating all the time on either Darkness or Shadow of Moyle. So while going straight Hexblade sure would give you better spell options, no question, when we think of like the best, most powerful spells in the game that those Hexblades would have access to, most of them require concentration, right? Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, Banishment, Hold Monster, those all require concentration. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, of course. You could get at 6th level Mass Suggestion, which is amazing, but generally, yeah, if we want to, as a Hexblade, do damage above all, then the fact that we have better, more powerful spells doesn't really come into play all that much when you're considering how powerful, how potent is this character, you know what I mean? Because if we give up our concentration on Shadow of Moyle at those higher levels, it very well may be the better thing to do for your entire party, but your damage is definitely going to go way down. And this Barbalock gets to both control and do damage. It might not be as powerful a control, but they don't really have to choose between one or the other quite so much. Right? That said, this build is a lot tankier with more hit points and big damage resistances, and probably more importantly, would be a lot better at consistently locking down one enemy, at least on the battlefield, while doing comparable damage to help keep their allies safe too. So I don't know that I can unequivocally say that one build is better or stronger than the other. I'm thrilled that the damage is pretty much the same. And beyond that, it kind of depends on what you're looking for in your Gishy Warlock, right? One thing I do feel confident about though, I think the Barbalock would be more fun to play. I could be wrong, but I did play a mostly Hexblade in a long, almost 2-year campaign, and it was a ton of fun, but admittedly, combat got a little rote, a little samey, a little boring. You cast Darkness or Shadow of Moyle, you wait around, and then you move in and basically murder hobo everything. Don't get me wrong, I love to murder hobo as much as, if not more than, most D&D players, but mixing it up on this build with some control via grapples, and maybe best of all, doing all that you can to actively encourage enemies to hit you and just cackling with glee every time they do, that's just gameplay gold right there. So yeah, I think this is going to be my next Warlock, if I ever get to play one in D&D again. Crap, I totally forgot to talk about how I would build this character in BG3. It works really well, and you don't need to change much. Fiend Warlock, obviously. And for the Barbarian subclass, you know, I'd probably go Wild Heart Bear so that you can just have resistance to all damage and really stretch that Armor of Agathis. But Berserker would work well too. You know, if you did that, you could actually skip Polearm Master. And while, yeah, the -1 penalty to hit that you take when you use that bonus action attack from Berserker is painful, with as often as we might need our bonus actions on this character to rage to get a free attack anyway from Great Weapon Master, right? I don't know that we'd necessarily be needing to do a frenzied attack, right? All that often. Obviously, we're not grappling, so this is just more of a straight up Barbarian from Hell Gish that's just putting Armor of Agathis on themselves, Fire Shield eventually, raging, and just hitting stuff, right? But it would hit stuff really hard. And getting Fire Shield and Armor of Agathis on yourself kind of more consistently and reliably would be easier, I think, in BG3, since most of the time you've got a pretty good idea when combat's about to happen, and with Armor of Agathis it lasts all day. And I hope that you enjoyed hearing about it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you like what I do on this channel, I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider joining as a member. There's a little button down there that says join. It's a great way to lend some additional financial support to me, but also for a couple of bucks a month, it gets you access to the library of write-ups that I create for each one of these builds so that you can recreate the character yourself in-game without having to go back and rewatch the video or take notes. I'd appreciate it if you consider it, and a huge shout out to all my channel members. You guys are amazing. Couldn't do this without you. But regardless of whether you're a member or not, I love you guys. Thank you so much for all that you do for me, for the channel. I hope you have a really great day and a fantastic week. And if you don't, please hang in there. You can do it. I hope that you stay safe and kind, and that I see you again very soon. But until then, take care. Bye. Maybe I just refuse to be here for you. Maybe that's who I am underneath my official plan. We die for easy pearls and leave the rest forgotten. We leave the best of worlds on the bottom. I've told you guys about Girly Man before, right? I know I have. Oh, they're so good. Prettiest harmonies in the world. And I don't know, their best stuff is their mellow, melancholy stuff. It's so pretty, but also a little, I don't know, what would you say? Nostalgic, or not even nostalgic, more melancholy, I suppose is a good word. But in a happy, warm, fuzzy, cathartic way? I don't know. They broke up a while ago. I wish that they were still together making music, because I love them. But a Warlock, but at level, don't say that. Oh, I didn't add this into the numbers. Hold, please. Well, just don't say that. Oops.